All right, so are you ready to unpack this 2024 election? I mean, seriously, folks. A lot of people are saying the analysts got it totally wrong. Trump back in the White House. Who could have predicted that?
I know, right? It's crazy.
So to get to the bottom of this, we've got some really interesting articles, data on all those voter trends, and full demographic breakdowns. The findings are, well, they're pretty mind-blowing. Like, we all know Trump won, but he didn't win with just his usual base. Something else happened here.
Yeah, he actually brought in a whole bunch of voters who hadn't supported him before.
Right. And it wasn't just a small number either. It was huge, like a massive shift, especially with certain demographics.
Absolutely.
So let's just get right to it. Let's talk about the Latino vote. I mean, huge changes this time around, particularly in Florida.
Oh, yeah, Florida was wild.
I mean, Miami-Dade County, that's been a Democratic stronghold forever. Like, it flipped red for the first time in, 36 years? It's unbelievable.
That is pretty unbelievable.
What happened?
Well, one of the articles we have highlights how Cuban-American voters down there in Miami-Dade, they were really drawn to Trump's hard stance on socialism. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, right? A lot of them left Castro's Cuba. That experience really stuck with them.
Yeah, so it makes sense that they would be concerned about anything that even remotely resembled socialism.
Exactly. And it was a powerful enough concern to push them away from their usual Democratic voting habits.
Okay, so this wasn't just a Florida thing then.
Nope. It was nationwide. There's this other study that actually breaks down the Latino vote by where folks are from originally and what generation they're in, first generation, second generation, that kind of thing.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it found that while Mexican-American voters were mostly sticking with the Democrats, voters with Cuban, Venezuelan, or Colombian backgrounds were way more likely to swing towards Trump.
So this idea that Latinos are all one big voting bloc, it's just not true anymore, huh?
Not at all. It's way more complicated than that.
It's like everything we thought we knew about voting patterns, it's like it's all changing right in front of us.
It really is.
Speaking of unexpected changes, let's talk about Black voters. Now, just to be clear, the majority still voted for Harris.
Right.
But, and this is a big but, Trump almost doubled his support among young Black men since 2020.
Yeah, that's a jump that we can't ignore. It was a big one.
What's the deal there?
Well, one of the articles really digs into that and suggests that maybe there's some disillusionment with the Democratic Party, It talks about this focus group where young Black men said they felt like the Democrats were taking them for granted. And get this, some of them even saw Trump as more authentic, like a rebel even.
So it sounds like they're not feeling heard by the Democrats, like their concerns aren't being addressed.
Exactly. And the article actually points to Trump's focus on school choice, like his support for charter schools and those voucher programs. That really resonated with a lot of Black parents who were, maybe frustrated with the public school system. And let's be honest, a lot of public schools are struggling.
Right, and that's especially true in cities where there's often a big gap in quality between schools.
Absolutely. So it's not just about politics. It's about real-life issues that are hitting people hard.
I'm noticing a trend here. A lot of this seems to tie back to economics, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like Trump really hit a nerve with that whole idea of bringing back a pre-COVID economy, that sense of stability. Remember those days?
Oh, yeah. I mean, things weren't perfect, but at least things felt predictable.
Right. Predictable. That's a good word for it.
And a lot of voters were longing for that.
So what you're saying is it's not necessarily about going back to a specific time. It's more about wanting that same feeling of security and stability that we had before everything went haywire.
Exactly. There's actually a report we have. It's crunched a bunch of data, and it found that people in counties that lost the most manufacturing jobs over the past decade were much more likely to vote for Trump this time around.
So bringing back jobs was a pretty powerful message for those voters, huh?
It was a home run.
It's like he managed to link those economic worries to a sense of nostalgia, like, remember when things were better?
It's like he was selling a return ticket to simpler times.
Yeah, and it worked, even if that picture of the past wasn't entirely accurate.
Nostalgia can be a very powerful force, especially when people are struggling.
Right, people will cling to anything that offers hope. And it seems like those economic concerns, they crossed racial and ethnic lines.
You're absolutely right about that. It wasn't just one group or another, it was everyone. One article even suggests that this election might show a move away from voting based on your race or ethnicity. And instead, it might be more about the economy.
Wow, that's a really interesting idea. Like, maybe we're becoming more focused on our wallets than our identities when it comes to politics.
It's a provocative thought, right?
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder what that means for the future of American politics.
It definitely does. So we've got all these voters from different backgrounds, all worried about money in the future. But it wasn't just about the message, was it? The Trump campaign also got really good at targeting specific groups.
Totally. It was like they stepped up their game in a big way. They went way beyond those rallies and the usual TV ads.
Yeah, it was a whole different ballgame.
There's this fascinating case study. It zeroes in on how they use TikTok. They were trying to get those younger voters, especially the young guys.
Yeah. TikTok makes sense. That's where they all are these days.
It's like they cracked the code.
Right, like figured out how to talk to a whole generation that's glued to their phones 24/7.
Exactly. They were using influencers, really targeted ads, even memes. I mean, it was like a whole new playbook for reaching young people. Nothing like we've seen before.
And it wasn't just online, right? I mean, they also went after Black and Latino musicians and athletes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They knew those folks have a ton of influence, especially within their communities.
So they were trying to leverage that cultural influence to reach new voters.
Absolutely. It was smart. One article even mentions this rapper who came out and endorsed Trump.
Wow, really? I wonder what his fans thought about that.
Well, his social media following, exploded. Young Black voters were all over his comment section arguing about it. It just shows you how powerful those kinds of endorsements can be, especially for voters who are kind of tuned out from traditional politics. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like they're speaking a different language, one that cuts through all the political noise.
Exactly. They knew they had to talk to people on their level, engage with them on their own terms. And, well, it seems like it worked.
So what we're seeing now is a much more complicated political scene. The old rules don't work anymore.
Yeah, things are changing fast.
So the question is, what happens now? I mean, if this is the new normal for how people vote, how will that change American politics in the long run?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll definitely dig into more as we keep going with this deep dive.
Okay, so just to quickly sum up what we've learned so far. Trump didn't just win because of his usual supporters. He actually got a whole bunch of new voters on his side. And we can't just chalk it up to one simple reason. Economics, cultural stuff, really smart outreach strategies, it's all connected. But there's even more to uncover, right?
Definitely. We've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
It's interesting how that whole economic anxiety thing, it kind of played out differently for different groups of people.
Yeah, it wasn't like everybody was feeling the same kind of pressure.
Exactly. One of the articles goes into how the whole decline of manufacturing jobs really hit certain communities hard, like way harder than others.
Makes sense.
It talks about how in places like the Rust Belt, when those jobs went away, it wasn't just about losing a paycheck.
Right, it was like their whole way of life was disappearing.
Exactly. These were communities built around those industries, They provided for families for generations.
So it's like their identity was tied to those jobs.
Yeah, and the article says that when Trump promised to bring those jobs back, it really hit home in those areas. It was like he was offering them a way back to a time when things made sense, when life felt more secure, more stable.
It's like he was tapping into this collective memory of loss, like a shared experience of grief, almost.
That's a really good way to put it. And it wasn't just about economics either. There was a big cultural component to it, too.
You mean like that whole idea that traditional values were being threatened, that kind of thing?
Exactly. A bunch of these articles talk about how Trump and the Republicans, they really tapped into those anxieties about cultural change. They focused on things like immigration and crime and what they call the erosion of family values, stuff like that.
Right, and it seems like those messages really connected with voters who felt like the country was changing too fast, like they couldn't keep up, like they were losing their grip on the world they knew.
Yeah, it was like this feeling of being left behind, like the America they grew up in was vanishing. And you know what? Trump really knew how to use that fear to his advantage.
He became the champion of the forgotten man, the defender of the old ways.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about bringing new voters into the fold either. He also really solidified his base, the people who were already with him.
Right, the diehards.
Yep. One of the reports we have, it breaks down the data on voter turnout, and it shows that Trump's base turned out in record numbers.
That's what was driving them.
Well, I think it was a mix of things. Loyalty to Trump, fear of what would happen if Harris won, and anger at all the changes happening around them.
The cultural and economic stuff we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And we can't forget about Trump's mastery of social media.
Oh, yeah, he was all over that.
I mean, he's always been good at manipulating the media, but it feels like he took it to a whole new level this time around.
He did.
One of the articles even talks about how his campaign used platforms like TikTok to basically create a whole pro-Trump universe. They understood how to use memes, those viral videos everyone shares, and influencer marketing, and they used them really well to reach those younger voters who aren't really interested in traditional politics, especially the young guys.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like they built this alternate reality where Trump was the hero and everyone else was the villain.
Exactly. And since a lot of this stuff was made and shared by everyday people, it felt more authentic, more relatable. Not like the usual polished messages you get from the mainstream media.
It was like they hacked the system by going straight to the source, using everyday people to spread their message.
And that's powerful because people trust their friends and family more than they trust some talking head on TV.
True. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses, was it? I mean, they also used social media to spread some pretty nasty misinformation.
Yeah, that's the dark side of all this.
And then it really messed with people's heads.
One of the articles goes into detail about how the Trump campaign actually amplified divisive content on purpose. They were stirring up those fears about election fraud. And in some cases, it even led to violence.
What's scary?
It is. It's like he weaponized social media to undermine people's trust in democracy. And it ended up helping them win.
It's kind of disturbing when you think about how easily people can be manipulated.
I know. It's like this whole digital revolution has a really dark side. We have to be careful out there.
We do. Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about something that might surprise you. One of the articles talks about how the very definition of whiteness is changing.
Oh, yeah, that was a fascinating one.
Tell me more about that. It sounds interesting.
Okay, so the author's point is that Trump's coalition kind of messed with the traditional idea of white voters being this one big group. He points out that Trump actually got a lot of support from Latino voters, and a lot of those folks identify as white, even though they're also Hispanic. So it's making people rethink how we categorize race and ethnicity.
Wait, so you're saying that these categories are becoming meaningless?
Well, not meaningless exactly, but maybe more fluid than we thought. The author's argument is that as America gets more diverse, with more intermarriage and these really complex cultural identities, those rigid racial boxes we put people in start to break down.
So it's not just about appealing to different groups anymore. It's like the definition of those groups is getting blurry.
Exactly. And that has huge implications for how we understand voting. If we can't rely on those old categories, how can we predict how people are going to vote in the future?
It's like we need a whole new playbook for understanding the electorate.
We do. And that brings us to another really important point. The whole thing about changing demographics. America is becoming way more diverse, and that's having a major impact on our politics.
We talked about the Latino vote earlier, but there are other changes happening too, right? Like, what about all the other groups?
Absolutely. One of the reports actually dives into the nitty-gritty of all that. It shows how the Asian American population is growing like crazy. There are way more multiracial voters now, and the white population is getting older. And all these trends are reshaping the political landscape in ways we're just starting to understand.
It's like the game board got shaken up and all the pieces moved around. And now we're trying to figure out how to play with the new rules.
It's a great way to think about it. And it means we've got to be more flexible, more open to understanding how people are making their voting decisions.
So to sum it up, we've got this whole mix of things going on. Economic anxieties, cultural changes, crazy smart digital campaigns, and the whole idea of identity changing. It's a lot to wrap your head around, even for someone like me who follows politics pretty closely.
I know, right? It's a lot. And it just shows how important it is to go beyond the surface level stuff. We need to really dig into the data to understand how people are thinking and what's motivating them.
We can't rely on those old simplistic explanations anymore. Things are just too complicated now.
I agree with you 100%. We have to be smarter about this. And that's exactly what we're going to keep doing as we finish up our deep dive.
All right, so we've talked about economic anxiety, shifting demographics, all that stuff. It's pretty clear that this election changed the game. But what does it all mean moving forward, like for the future of American politics?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
What?
And honestly, I think one of the biggest takeaways from all this is that we're in this major period of political realignment. All those old ideas about how people vote and what influences their choices, they just don't hold up anymore.
It's like watching the ground shift beneath our feet. Everything we thought we knew is changing.
Exactly. And, this whole realignment thing could completely reshape the political landscape. We might see new parties pop up, the existing ones might totally transform, or heck, maybe we'll even move away from the two-party system altogether.
Wow, makes you wonder if we'll have to rewrite all those history books.
Right. One article even goes so far as to say that this might be the beginning of the end for the Democratic Party as we know it.
Whoa, hold on. That's a pretty big statement. What makes them think that?
Well, they say that the Democrats are losing touch with working-class Americans,
Hmm.
both white and non-white. They think the party is too focused on identity politics and social issues and not enough on the stuff that really matters to everyday people, like being able to afford groceries and feeling safe in their communities.
So basically, they're saying the Democrats are too caught up in the culture wars and not paying enough attention to the things that affect people's lives on a daily basis.
That's the gist of it, yeah.
Yeah.
And they predict that if the Democrats don't shift gears, they're going to keep losing voters to the Republicans. Or maybe even to some brand new populist party that comes along and says, hey, we're here to fight for the working class.
So it's like the whole political landscape is becoming more fragmented, more divided.
Yeah, and that fragmentation is probably going to get worse as the country keeps getting more diverse. We're already seeing it with all these identity-based political movements, both on the left and the right.
It's like instead of two big teams, we might end up with a bunch of smaller teams all fighting for their own little corner of the field.
That's a good way to visualize it.
Yeah.
And it would make it way harder to actually get anything done in government. Can you imagine trying to pass laws in a Congress where you have 5 or 6 different parties all pulling in different directions?
Oh man, talk about gridlock.
It would be chaos. It's like the system itself is struggling to keep up with all this change.
So what does all this mean for us regular folks who are just trying to understand what's happening?
I think the most important thing is to be really careful about the information we're consuming. We can't just rely on the same old sources and the same old stories anymore. We have to look for different perspectives, question our assumptions, and be willing to talk to people who see things differently than we do.
It's like we have to become our own political analysts.
Right. We have to do the research, connect the dots, and figure out what it all means for us.
Because when things are changing this fast, the only way to stay ahead of the curve is to be informed, engaged, and open to new ideas.
I totally agree.
So to sum everything up, we saw how Trump won because of this whole mix of things. Economic worries, cultural anxieties, really targeted outreach, and this whole shifting idea of identity. But the really important thing here is that this election shows us that American politics are changing in a big way. And this realignment could transform the entire system.
And as we move forward, we got to remember that it's not just about who's in the White House. It's about what kind of country we want to be. It's about how we treat each other, even when we disagree. And it's about what kind of future we want to create together.
Wow, those are some powerful thoughts. A lot to think about.
I hope so. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this deep dive, it's that we're not just along for the ride here. We all have a say in what happens next.
That's a great reminder. It's like even though things might feel kind of crazy right now, we still have the power to make a difference. We can speak up, hold our leaders accountable, and fight for a better world.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.